Hello, my name's Alistair Bogle and I represent Bennetts Associates Architects, and I'm going to be talking you through today the proposals for the new development of Hertford Theatre. So what I'd like to do with you now is just run through where we started with the project, what we've been up to over this period of time up to now, and hopefully give you a sense of where we're hoping to end up. Before I begin, it's worth giving a little bit of background around ourselves. Obviously, I'm not doing this project just by myself. I represent Bennetts Associates Architects, who have over 30 years experience working in the creative sector. These are just a few of our projects actually on the slides: the Royal Shakespeare Theatre in Stratford-upon-Avon, Story House in Chester, Hampstead Theatre. We've worked with the Old Vic for a number of years, and Citizens Theatre up in Glasgow there. So we're backed by a sort of wealth of knowledge and experience that's helped develop this scheme to the position it's been in right now. And along with our wider consortium of consultants and East Hertford District Council and the theatre itself, we're looking to create a real cultural hub for Hertford, building on the success that as they've already achieved over the last few years. We're a small part of the journey that the theatre's been on, and it's an exciting one to create growth and legacy, and a building that is a real asset to both the council and the local community. So the journey that we've been on, we came into this project last year in June, and we have been working through the RIBA work stages. We've just completed RIBA work stage 3, which is a develop design stage. That allows me to be in a position talking to you right now, showing you the designs that we've come up with the building in a consultation environment, albeit virtual, and that allows us to move into a planning phase of the job, with hopefully putting the planning application in early October, with mind to beginning RIBA stage 4 with a sort of technical design phase in the autumn, moving into hopefully construction in the new year, later on in the new year. So when we talk about a project, we always tend to start with the place. I think that's very important. And actually, this is probably one of the most advantageous sites that I've ever actually worked on. The theatre occupies a really prominent location in the town, at the top of the high street, right next to the River Lee and the Castle Gardens grounds. It has a lot of assets. It also has a lot of historical character and a nature that needs to be respected and understood. There is the understanding that there's a need for a contemporary building as the new Hertford Theatre, but at the same time we need to understand and respect the special character that Hertford sits in with. And at the same time, there are a number of incredible assets around the site that maybe aren't quite given as much prominence as they should be at the moment. There is the understanding of, the River Lee, that setting, the historic motte, which if you didn't know it was there, it just looks like a man berth at the moment. There is a wider story about Hertford that this building allows us to tease out, and there's something really interesting and powerful to that. So at the moment, unfortunately, the current building, albeit does a lot for what it is right now, it doesn't quite do everything it needs to be doing just to maintain the business from a sort of business sustainability point of view. There are some core issues around the way the building sits within its location and operates that we need to overcome. At the moment, the building seems to have quite a muddled arrangement on the street. It doesn't really engage with the river edge at all. Internally, the building does a lot with a little, but it's quite tired, and it needs to be future-proofed and improved, and improve the quality of each of these spaces to sort of make it bring the level of a venue up, make it feel a lot more like a theatre actually. And then there's just a general sense of a general lack of connectivity between the building and its surroundings. So what's the brief that represents growth and legacy? And this is something that has been developed over a number of years before our involvement in the project. But growth and legacy represents the gold standard for what we would consider a great building for Hertford. And that would include increasing the capacity in the auditorium, so taking it up to 550 seats, introducing specific cinema spaces, and that is over 200 seats spread over 3 screens. That allows us to first release cinema into the theatre. Crucially, at the moment, the theatre operates on a second release basis. Having dedicated cinema spaces would allow us to have first release cinema and then have a real interesting place to go for Hertford. In addition to that, there is a 150-seat studio theatre that can operate a little bit like a mini version of the auditorium. So you get smaller touring companies, maybe something more local context, you get speakers. Really interesting way that the two of those performance spaces can work in synergy. And then that is intertwined with rooms for hire. At the moment, the theatre does a really good level of community engagement. It has a lot of community hireable offers. We want to build on that, expand that if possible. We don't really want to leave anyone behind with this development. We want to take everyone on that journey with us. And then there's a real sense of whenever we've worked as Bennetts associates on these sort of cultural projects, it's really important to get all of the interstitial space between all of these main brief items to work, because that's the sort of glue that holds all these items together. And then the sort of third pillar, you'd say, that goes with this development is thinking about sustainability. And you start to think about what are the principles in creating a sustainable building for Hertford. I mean, a lot of sustainability can feel a little bit too out there or something that's a little impenetrable. I think there's a lot of common sense that can be built into sustainable thinking. Part of it is hopefully selecting the right team. And as I said previously, we're architects who have over 30 years experience working in the industry and working within sustainable design. So hopefully we can see that through in a sort of mentality way and build that into the project as with our consultants. The next thing is about thinking about targets. We have BREEAM Excellent as quite an ambitious target for a theatre. These types of buildings, it's actually quite hard to achieve certain targets on them, but setting targets is also a very important way that means that you're allowed to assess your building against things. Then there's sort of these core ideas about how you want to approach a building of this type, or any type, to be honest. And then there's these sort of principles about maybe building less. What I mean by that is retaining things where possible, but also just using less stuff. If you make the structure of the building beautiful, then you don't necessarily need to cover it, so therefore you don't need to buy lots of materials. So those sorts of thinking and principles work their way through the job. The next one was obviously build low carbon. It sounds a little bit boring, but actually at the stage of the job that we're moving into, where we're sort of specifying materials, picking materials, there's a real amount of work that can go on in the background that makes sure that the materials that you specify for the building are low in embodied energy. And by that I mean that the energy that goes into making those materials doesn't have a large number of carbon exuded in it. Building efficiently is obviously the next one, and that is thinking about the layout of the building, making the services as efficient as possible, go electric obviously, use sustainable electricity where possible, drive down the operational energy use in your building, and where it does use energy, make sure that energy is efficient, as green as possible. And then there's a thing at the bottom about measure, but the real one I want to talk about here is actually the last one, which is just a sense of building beautiful. And if the building is something that is loved by people, then people will want to use it. And by use, the building will create longevity. And a building that is successful and being used over time is ultimately a sustainable one, because people want to be there from a social point of view. So what's our design response been over the past year and a bit? It's been an iterative and a collaborative process between ourselves, our wider stakeholders, the planners, the council, the design team, and the client itself. Hopefully they've got a design. Well, we feel we have a design that responds to these core issues that's outlined about the way the building needs to respond to the brief and the site. And there's a balance that the building actually is constantly striking between being a contemporary form in the town, but also something that feels contextual. So I'll just start with the massing, and this obviously, don't worry, this isn't what the building looks like. This is a number of massing models that just shows you the sort of journey of iterations we've been on through from stage 1 all the way to stage 3. And where we are is we have a building that is arranged around sculptural forms of that are shaped and have edges and angled roof that build themselves around the retained auditorium that allow us to create a sort of sculptural form that as an ensemble works around the existing auditorium. Each of those volumes houses an item of the brief. I mean, since this hasn't really changed too much since stage one, where the strategy for the building was to have the cinemas grouped closer to the roadside, with the studio theatre closer to the Mott, and the sort of rooms for hire being sort of in the more central space, opening up the riverside and potential views across there. And then each of those volumes is then carved. So the idea that they're solid blocks, real solid blocks that have been carved open to create windows and entrances, that's something that was quite important to be read both on the outside of the building. That means that each of these volumes has a sort of direct relationship with an exterior space, be it the town or the river, that it's directly adjacent with. It therefore makes the building a lot more locked into its environment and a lot more environment. It allows you to sort of experience the building episodically from a number of different viewpoints, and as you move around it, it feels like it's different. Also, because of that character of a series of blocks wrapped around an existing form, it starts to almost take on the sense of a little town in itself, which we like the idea of, and that sort of frames a central town square or courtyard where in between the new build elements and the existing auditorium. There's something really interesting about that idea, and I think that follows through when you see the use of materials externally and internally. So this is just a few sort of ideas about the key views, that each of these volumes, as we say, has not just sort of been created as an individual block, but been considered as part of a whole, and how that ensemble is read in both the context of approaching it from a number of different angles and different key views. And we've worked with our visualizers and our planners to curate these views so they aren't harmful to any aspect of the town and historic context which the town sits in, while understanding that this is actually a very interesting series of containers. So as we move into sort of what the outside of the building is made of, that idea that I said of a series of solid blocks that have been carved with a material that can be read internally and externally as one that's been carried through. Also, something that's been really key to us as our thinking is, at the moment, the building doesn't really have a quality that reflects the craft and quality that goes on in the work inside. And it's something we've always said, and something we want to reflect in any new building that we produce in the town. There's something great that goes on inside that building. We want people to be proud of what the outside of the building looks in a sort of similar fashion. Now, that idea about those solid blocks, that brick, makes you feel like that's the right choice for this building. It has a solidity to it. It reinforces that idea of a series of blocks. It suits the context of Hertford, and crucially, it can be something that can be read in internally and externally. I mean, we're not suggesting that the existing building left behind is a complete ruin, but what we're actually just sort of suggesting, alluding to with this image, is the fact that brick can be used in both a contemporary but also contextual manner. And also the beauty of brick is it allows you to, with clever detailing, just give an extra level of interest to a facade that allows you to feel a little bit more distinctive, not so overbearing or austere. The way that we've approached our building at Hertford is to lift the detailing of this building. Is we're working within the actual brick bond that we've chosen, and we're looking at working with a Flemish bond, which is an alternating stretcher and header course. That allows us actually to play around with the long face, the stretcher, and the header face, which is the short end. That allows us, what we're suggesting is we're protruding that header course out actually from the facade slightly. That means that you create a sort of textural surface that catches the light, and then we're interpolating that through with a glazed element of the stretcher course, so there's a sort of interplay between a shiny element. We've decided that we are going to sort of create a datum where each of the window openings, and so there's a sort of rule that that each block is governed by, but because each block has a window of a slightly different size and shape, it creates variation between each block. So as you can see here, there's that idea of a brick volume with a glazed element with a header course that's protruding out that is interpolated through that surface. And the last sort of level of detail to that is from the window head, we've suggested that brick course can then feather away by just slowly pushing that header course back and maybe almost creating a pattern on that surface. You create a sort of gradient detail across the facade that means that whether you're looking at it on an oblique angle or straight on, the building will feel different. So the building will change over the course of the day depending on the way the light hits it, but it will also change in how you move around the building. So immediately it creates something that you want to experience. That's why it's quite important that the building has edges and corners that you want to read, so because each time you're met by a corner you will want to be pulled around it. So it's a building that you want to experience all around. So how does that transfer into a layout? This is a sort of axonometric diagram in space, with the road being closer to the number 1 there, and the riverside being along the edge, the longer edge of the volumes. So you obviously have an arrangement of the things that you need in the building. You have a cafe bar, you have your seating spaces, you have your studio theatre stalls and your auditorium, you have working spaces, offices, and obviously things that actually in auditorium theatre buildings are actually very important, which is toilets, getting the right amount. And all of this sort of works in a sort of ground floor which feels sinuous, and connected and open, but also enclosed at the same time. There's something quite interesting. And then you move up into a sort of second floor level or first floor level around an atrium space that has as you can see here, each of the cinema screens in individual blocks, accessed from a single point of entry, which helps with operation. And on this floor you can obviously get access to the stalls level, the circle level of the auditorium, the studio theatre, and obviously a second room for hire. So just to talk about the auditorium a little bit, the performance spaces in general are something that get developed a little bit more into the technical design, but at the moment we've worked very, very hard to sort of understand what the nature of this new space will be. It's going to be it'll feel something completely transformed to what you have right now. At the moment you have very much an interesting room, but it has a very civic quality to it. With that, you have an end-on bleacher seat, which obviously gives you a sort of an experience that feels a little bit like a village hall. We want to create something that feels a lot more like a theatre, something that has drama to it as soon as you walk through the entrance. By the ways that we've achieved that is actually by removing the current soffit that's in there right now, stripping out the existing seating and leaving almost the shell of the space. That allows us to sort of line the walls, increase the height of the overall volume, so we can add a balcony level in, enclose the space a little bit more to give you a good sense of enclosure and intensity to that works with theatre. And then we've worked with our theatre consultants to craft a set of balconies that work in a cinema and in a theatre mode. The studio theatre itself, they operate quite a lot like black box spaces, and this one obviously will do the same thing. It will also have, like the auditorium actually, it will also deliver cinema as well. So both of those spaces have to work in both modes, which is quite interesting. So the quirks of the studio theatre is it's quite an interesting space actually as it's been developed. At the moment it's a piece of seating that you walk into a seat well, so when you sit down you're almost at stage level, which is quite nice, and there's a sense of a feeling because it sits next to the river that you'd almost be sitting in the river, which is kind of funny to us. And obviously it works with the proportions of the facade, that it has an element of a window which obviously gets blacked out and covered during performances, but during the day and potentially in other times of the day there has a reflective quality to it. So this is just taking you through just a few of these key spaces in some sort of rudimentary renders. This is an idea of the entrance, and this is one of those times where you read these confluence of blocks, and this is a punched opening through one of them, so you enter underneath a block, so there's already a piece of drama that's working there. Each opening has a sort of metal framing element that just allows a cleanliness of detailing and sort of introduces the drama of what a theatre is. It immediately has the signage and the lighting which screams theatre during day or night, and you can see how the facade elements that we've talked about previously can start to catch the light in really interesting ways. When you move into that central space, you get an idea of the whole of the building because of that central atria, and you can orientate yourself quite easily. Obviously, you can see here that there's the bar area, and off to the left there's the big double height glazing that's over the river. But also you can see that there's a really interesting two-story space allowing people to move around, find spaces that they feel comfortable in, and a real sense of variety spatially that can happen in that space. That transfers it on to the same on the upper level as well, obviously something that doesn't happen in the existing building. So you've got a number of people transferred over a number of levels. That helps us deal with operationally with crowds, but also just adds a little bit more interest to the building as it moves from day into night and how the building will operate. So that sort of gives you a sense of the key spaces within the building and how the building works from a sort of materiality point of view. The last thing is to talk about is just how the landscape and how the building meets the adjacencies around it. What the landscape's obviously proposed to do is we're obviously providing a high quality setting for the new theatre. We want to improve the relationship between the town and the building itself. We talked about that previously. Improve the banks of the River Lee. You know, one of the important things directors of this project actually has been the idea of being able to connect up the Castle Gardens grounds with the wash through a walkway along the river edge. That's something that just doesn't happen at the moment, and that's a key part of our proposals. And then allowing visitors the opportunity for enjoy a wider section of the River Lee, of course, because at the moment it's an asset that is really underused. So that sort of transpires into 5 key areas really. So there's a sort of more transfer space that is more of a public plaza or a yard type space, because obviously it has to take deliveries for the theatre. Obviously the streetscape along the wash, the island garden that sort of exists down by where the bus stop is right now. Then you've got this river frontage and moat walkway which link together, and this is new space along the river edge which allows you to transfer into Castle Gardens grounds and engage directly with the moat, something that is completely new to this project. So the 2 working spaces, you know, they're just there's hard standing. There's actually a lot of good pavement there already that we'd be looking to retain, but these are just sort of working areas that sort of work for the public as a piece of public realm to the building that don't feel dominated by cars. We're proposing that actually there isn't going to be any parking on site, and we've worked with a traffic consultant when we're continuing to work with a traffic consultant to craft a traffic plan that works for the building to make sure that there is enough parking within town, and the engagement that you can have about where to find car parking spaces is something that's being developed. As you move on into the river frontage and the island gardens, you can see that we're sort of trying to create these really interesting spaces along the river, using native species, things that are bee friendly, to allow people an understanding of a route along the river edge and enjoy the setting of the theatre with that route. And then lastly, the idea of you being able to really directly engage with the moat. And to do this, we're proposing actually a walkway that sits around the outside of the moat, at the base, above the floodplain, and also not too far into the moat, using screw piles that would allow you to not harm the moat in any sort of way in that manner, because obviously it's a very important piece of archaeology and we don't want to be doing any damage to either the bank or the moat itself. So this is a sort of minimal intervention that allows access and engagement with something that is really important to Hertford. I talked about sustainability as a sort of broad brush at the beginning, but there are some things that it's really interesting to talk about the way that we've approached the building. Obviously, at the start of it, when I talked about build less, we have tried to retain as much of the building as possible. The front of house spaces really weren't fit for purpose, so that's why they had to be removed. But the auditorium shell itself is something that we, didn't need to be demolished, so we kept it. The structure of the new build elements of the building is sort of a hybrid between using concrete where it's required for the loadings and acoustic reasons, and actually cross-laminated timber as that helps for weight reasons, but also it has really good sustainable qualities to it. So the upper level of the building is largely made out of CLT. As we move into the next phase, the idea of building low carbon, specifying the right materials, that's something that we're going to be moving on to next. And then ideas about upgrading the external fabric, using efficient services. Obviously, we're using air source heat pumps for heating and cooling the building. They're electrically driven. As the grid decarbonizes itself, this helps the building become a more sustainable building over time. These will be linked to obviously intelligent building systems that help drive down the energy use when in operation. And the last few things is hopefully about building a building, like I said, a building that people will want to spend time in, want to feel comfortable and safe in, and have a series of flexible and adaptable spaces that people feel like that they can almost take ownership of, because that's the best sort of building that people feel comfortable in and want to spend. A few things about just obviously the cost and program we had a budget that was signed off at stage 3, and we are within that budget and cost envelope, and we will always be, as an intention of the project, be within that cost envelope. And some of these key dates just coming up is, as I said, this is part of our consultation that we're running now, so hopefully you can get involved. The technical design commences in October, and hopefully we're looking for procurement, appointing a contractor in the new year, with construction starting around August 2021, and hopefully we'll all be back in the theatre for April 2023. So I'd just like to leave you with just this idea of hopefully talk you through where we've been on the project, what the journey we've been on, and the last thing I said about what we want to talk about is where we want to be. I think where we want to be is have a really brilliant, beautiful, contemporary building for Hertford that you can all feel proud of and you all want to spend time in. And I think there's an idea that collectively, the idea of being able to come together and gather in places is something that even in this time at this moment feels a long way off, but is something that we can all look forward to in the future. So thank you very much. Obviously, please, we'd like to hear your feedback. So there's a Growth and Legacy email there. If you go to the Hertford Theatre website, that is also on there at the same time, along with a further FAQs, consultation materials. And if you have any thoughts, we'd love to hear them. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's a bit strange doing it virtually, but hopefully at some point I'll be able to see people and we'll all be able to see each other again. So thank you very much, and hopefully see you soon. Bye-bye.